See Windolph's shocking account of Custer's last stand in the United States Army, who fought in the Battle of Little Bighorn.
The infamous last stand of General Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn was even more devastating than we were told, as new evidence reveals a horrific truth. But what was the true fate of Custer and his men? And how did the new evidence shed light on the brutal nature? Join us as we delve into the chilling truths. The making of a boy general. The timing of the Civil War could not have been more perfect for George Custer to show the world what he was made of. From the very start, he demonstrated his bravery and sharp mind as a leader. Custer wasn't the kind of man to stay behind, giving orders from a safe distance. Instead, he led from the front, charging into battle without a second thought. His courage was clear to everyone around him, and he quickly became a symbol of strength. He didn't hesitate to dive into the hardest tasks, earning the respect and admiration of his men. Custer's boldness didn't go unnoticed. As the Union Army welcomed new leaders in June 1863, they sought out brave officers to take charge. Custer, with his fearless attitude, was selected alongside two other young men. Despite having little command experience, he was made a brigadier general at just 23 years old, one of the youngest in American history. He took command of the Michigan Cavalry Brigade, nicknamed the Wolverines, and quickly molded them to reflect his own daring and unshakable spirit. Custer's role as a leader also gave him the freedom to choose his uniform, which was as bold as his personality. Some people thought his clothing was too flashy, but Custer had a purpose. He wanted his soldiers to always see him on the battlefield, to know where their leader was so they could rally behind him. His presence in the front lines inspired his men, making them fight even harder when they saw him leading the charge. But Custer's bravery didn't start when he became a general. Long before, as a young soldier with the 2nd U.S. Cavalry, he had already proven his courage. He carried important messages during the First Battle of Bull Run, and in the Peninsula Campaign, he stood out at the Siege of Yorktown. One story that stuck with his fellow officers was when Custer, in the middle of uncertainty, rode into a river to test its depth, something no one else dared to do. This act of bravery earned him the respect of everyone around him. Soon, his comrades began calling him the Boy General because of his fearless nature and his golden hair. Everywhere Custer went, his bold actions became legendary. One of his most unforgettable moments came during the Battle of Gettysburg on July 3, 1863, when he led a daring charge against Confederate troops. His actions played a key role in securing the Union's victory, cementing his place as one of the war's great heroes. Throughout the rest of the war, Custer's bravery never wavered. He fought with unwavering courage until the final moments of the conflict. When the war ended, Custer's wife received a special gift, a table with a note praising her husband's contribution to the victory. But how did he start his life? How was his early life? Let's find out. The bold beginning of George Custer. George Armstrong Custer's story began in the small town of New Rumley, Ohio. Born into a hard-working family, his father, Emanuel Henry Custer, worked tirelessly as a farmer and blacksmith. His mother, Marie Ward Kirkpatrick, came from a family with deep English and Scots-Irish roots. George was part of a lively and bustling household. He had two younger brothers, Thomas and Boston, and a younger sister, Margaret. There was also his brother Nevin, who struggled with asthma and rheumatism, as well as three older half-siblings, creating a tight-knit and often playful family. The Custer siblings enjoyed playing pranks on each other, filling their home with laughter and fun. Growing up, George's father believed in the importance of hard work and strong values. He made sure that his children learned about responsibility and discipline from an early age. For George, this meant working hard, but it also meant learning about the world and finding his place in it. As a young boy, George had dreams of education, so he moved in with his half-sister in Monroe, Michigan, to further his studies. Eventually, he enrolled at McNeely Normal School in Ohio, where he trained to become a teacher. However, financial struggles made things difficult for George. To get by, he worked hauling coal in exchange for food and a place to sleep. Despite these hardships, George remained determined to continue his education. In 1856, after completing his studies, he briefly worked as a teacher in Cadiz, Ohio. It was during this time that he experienced his first taste of love, developing feelings for a young woman named Mary Jane Holland. In 1857, George's life took a new turn when he enrolled at the prestigious West Point Military Academy. At the time, his class had 79 cadets, but the Civil War quickly changed everything. With the war breaking out, the military accelerated their academic programs, and George graduated in 1861, ranking near the bottom of his class of 34 students. The war caused many cadets to either drop out or join the Confederacy. The sweetheart of George Custer. George Custer's love story was just as bold and unforgettable as he was. In 1864, he married Elizabeth Clift Bacon, a beautiful and smart young woman from Monroe, Michigan. Their story began years earlier, when George was only 10 years old and first noticed her. It wasn't until 1862, during a visit home, that he was properly introduced to her. At first, Elizabeth wasn't impressed. Her father, Judge Daniel Bacon, didn't think much of George either. To him, George was simply the son of a blacksmith, not good enough for his precious daughter. But George was never one to give up easily. He was determined to prove his worth. Through his bravery in battle and steady rise in the military, he began to change people's opinions. When he earned the title of Brigadier General, even Judge Bacon had to admit George was worthy. 14 months after meeting, George and Elizabeth finally married in a simple, happy ceremony. From that day forward, Elizabeth, whom George lovingly called Libby, became his closest friend and greatest supporter. Their love was tender and strong. Even though George spent much of his time on the battlefield, he never stopped thinking about Libby. They exchanged loving letters, holding on to their dreams of peaceful days together. Whenever they could steal a moment, it was filled with warmth and joy. Life on the frontier wasn't easy. After the Battle of Washita River in 1868, rumors spread about a young Cheyenne woman named Mona Seta. Some whispered that she and Custer shared a secret marriage and even had a child. Others believed it might have been Custer's brother, Thomas, instead. But no matter what stories people told, Custer's heart always belonged to Libby. Amidst all these, Custer still wanted fame. He found a new path, but it ended badly. What happened? Stick with us. The fight for the Black Hills. In 1868, George Custer was still chasing the fame he had always wanted. He saw his chance when the United States turned its attention to the Black Hills, a beautiful land that belonged to the Sioux people. The Sioux had lived there for many years and loved their land deeply. They were not willing to give it up without a fight. That year, the Fort Laramie Treaty was made. It promised the Sioux they could keep the Black Hills if they agreed to stay on a reservation and stop attacking settlers. But sadly, the U.S. government never planned to keep this promise. The Black Hills were rich with resources, and many believed the Sioux would eventually break the treaty, making it easier for the government to take the land.
The Sioux and the Cheyenne don't want to give up their land on the northern plains.
Some Sioux leaders wanted peace and accepted the agreement. But one man refused: Chief Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull was wise, proud, and deeply spiritual. He could see through the empty promises and knew the government would try to steal their land anyway. More than just a warrior, Sitting Bull was a respected leader who brought together the Lakota, Cheyenne, and other tribes to stand against this injustice. As tensions rose, the U.S. government needed a bold, daring leader to deal with the growing resistance. So, they turned to George Custer. In 1874, Custer was sent to lead an expedition into the Black Hills. Officially, the mission was to find a good spot for a fort to watch over Sitting Bull and his people. But everyone knew the real reason. They were hunting for gold, and Custer was eager to lead the way. Surprisingly, this trip was not filled with battles. Custer and his men spent more time hunting wild game than worrying about Native American attacks. With photographers and reporters tagging along, the adventure made for exciting stories and photos in newspapers back east. When gold was discovered, the news spread like wildfire. By the end of 1875, around 15,000 white settlers had rushed into the Black Hills. Though the government claimed they couldn't stop them, President Ulysses Grant secretly welcomed it, hoping it would stir up trouble. Later that year, the government tried one last time to buy the land from the Sioux. When they refused, a cruel order followed. Any Native Americans not on a reservation by January would be treated as enemies. In the dead of winter, it was an impossible and heartbreaking choice for the people. The trap was set. By 1873, Custer was sent to a new post at Fort Abraham Lincoln in Dakota Territory. His mission now was to deal with the growing resistance of Sitting Bull, a wise and fearless Sioux leader who refused to give up his land. At the fort, Custer gathered his closest followers, including his brothers Tom and Boston, his brother-in-law James Calhoun, and even his wife Libby, who moved there to stay close to him. Not everyone in Custer's circle was a soldier. A skilled scout named Bloody Knife, who was part Sioux and part Arikara, also became one of Custer's trusted men. Bloody Knife carried deep hatred for Sitting Bull and his warriors, especially a fierce leader named Gall. On May 17, 1876, a big and important journey began from Fort Abraham Lincoln. The goal was clear: to find Sitting Bull and his people and force them to surrender. The man in charge was General Alfred Terry, a steady and trusted leader, and also a good friend of George Custer. But even though Terry was the leader, it was no secret that Custer wanted to be the one in the spotlight. He dreamed of winning a great battle and becoming a famous hero. The Army scouts had good news. They believed Sitting Bull's large camp was near the Yellowstone River, where 4 other rivers, the Powder, the Tongue, the Rosebud, and the Big Horn, all met. This spot was perfect for the native tribes to gather, but it was also the perfect place for the Army to trap them. The Army's plan was simple, but very risky. General Terry and Custer would move in from Dakota, General John Gibbon would come from Montana, and General George Crook would march up from Wyoming. The idea was to surround Sitting Bull's people like a giant net closing in from all sides. Custer, as always, was excited. He treated the mission like a grand adventure. Along the way, he would often stop to go hunting with his brothers or explore new places, which annoyed Terry and the other officers. Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen were especially frustrated. They were tired of Custer's overconfidence and risky behavior. To keep the plan moving, Terry sent Major Reno ahead to scout along the Rosebud River. Reno did his job well and found the trail of Sitting Bull's people. But when he reported back, Custer scolded him for not chasing it further. Even though the two disagreed, Terry came up with a bold new plan. He decided to join forces with Gibbon and move down the Big Horn River from the north. Meanwhile, Custer would follow the trail south along the Rosebud River. By this point, they knew exactly where Sitting Bull's camp was. Before sending him off, Terry gave Custer one very clear order: do not attack alone. Wait for the rest of the army. But everyone knew Custer's hunger for glory, and most doubted he could resist. While the army closed in, Sitting Bull was busy gathering his people too. He called together warriors from far and wide. They came from the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and other tribes. They were fighting for their land, their families, and their way of life. Sitting Bull was not only a brave warrior, but a wise and deeply spiritual leader. He knew a great battle was coming. The summer of 1876 could be their last chance to live free on the open plains. Sitting Bull made plans, so did Custer. But someone from the Bulls' camp was like Custer. Who was this? Let's find out. The brave spirit of Crazy Horse. Among the Lakota people, one warrior stood out like no other. His name was Crazy Horse. He was young, fearless, and filled with a wild, daring spirit. Though he came from a different Lakota band, he shared a deep love for the land and his people. Like the wise Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse trusted powerful visions to guide his life. One of those visions even gave him the name he carried with pride. In the summer of 1876, as the U.S. Army moved closer to native lands, Crazy Horse rose to the challenge. On June 17th, scouts spotted General Crook's soldiers resting by the Rosebud River. Crazy Horse didn't hesitate. Leading around 1,500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, he made a brave and bold choice. Most native leaders would wait for the right moment, or for their numbers to grow before attacking soldiers. But Crazy Horse was different. He believed in fighting for his people's freedom, no matter the odds. He quickly came up with a clever plan. His warriors would surround the soldiers from all sides, confusing them at every turn. The Lakota and Cheyenne rushed in from every direction, so fast and unpredictable that the American soldiers didn't know where to look or how to defend themselves. The battle was fierce.
It's one of the most crushing defeats in American history. Custer's last stand.
Gunshots echoed through the hills, dust filled the air, and brave warriors rode swiftly on horseback. About 30 of Crook's men fell in battle before the rest of the soldiers managed to escape. If not for their Crow and Shoshone scouts helping them flee, Crook's army might have been completely lost. This victory gave new hope to the native tribes. It showed them that even against powerful armies, courage and unity could win the day. When Sitting Bull heard of the battle, he knew the time was coming for something even bigger. He gathered nearly 8,000 Lakota and Cheyenne and led them to a peaceful place known as the Valley of the Greasy Grass, by the Little Bighorn River. There, the people came together for the sacred Sundance ceremony, a time of prayer, sacrifice, and hope for protection. During this holy time, Sitting Bull had another powerful vision. In it, he saw many American soldiers entering their camp, and soon afterward, those soldiers falling one by one. He believed it was a sign. A great victory was near. While the native people prepared in spirit and strength, Custer and his men were following their trail. Some of Custer's own scouts, like the brave Bloody Knife, warned him that there were far more native warriors waiting than he expected. Bloody Knife begged for more soldiers to be sent as backup. But Custer, proud and stubborn, ignored the warning. The morning of the last stand. As the sun rose on June 28, 1876, Custer's scouts climbed the hills near the Little Bighorn River. From the top, they saw thin trails of smoke rising from Sitting Bull's camp far away. To Custer, this was the sign he had been waiting for. He believed this would be his greatest victory, the battle that would make him a hero in history books forever.
But Custer's luck endeared him to the senior Union leadership. He led by example in battle, never shirking or avoiding direct contact, even against superior numbers.
Custer had about 700 soldiers with him, divided into 12 groups. Some would stay behind to guard supplies and animals, while the rest would get ready for battle. Custer came up with a bold plan. He would lead 5 groups to cross the river and attack from the north. Major Reno would take 3 groups and attack from the south. With him was a brave scout named Bloody Knife to help guide the way. Captain Benteen would lead the last 3 groups in a circle from the south, then come in from the west. Custer didn't fully trust Reno and Benteen. He preferred to rely on his brothers, Tom and Boston, and his brother-in-law, Lieutenant Calhoun, who were already by his side. Slowly, Custer led his men north, hiding behind hills and waiting for just the right moment. By 3:30 in the afternoon, Custer and his troops reached the final hilltop and saw the village below. What they saw shocked them. The camp was huge, much bigger than they expected, with thousands of lodges stretched out across the land. Even though it was clear the village was larger than they had imagined, Custer refused to wait. He quickly wrote a note to Benteen, telling him to hurry with the supplies, and sent a rider off with it. But Custer was growing impatient. He took off his hat and waved it in the air, signaling the attack. Meanwhile, Major Reno crossed the river from the south with about 150 men. The first shots were fired when Lakota and Cheyenne warriors spotted Bloody Knife and the other scouts. The people in the camp, led by Sitting Bull, now knew the soldiers were coming. Reno's men charged at the camp, firing their guns. Sadly, bullets struck not only warriors, but women and children too. Sitting Bull, wanting to protect his people, sent his nephew and another warrior to try and talk to the soldiers. But before they could speak, both were shot and killed. Heartbroken and angry, Sitting Bull jumped on his horse, but it was shot out from under him. This was the final spark. The Lakota and Cheyenne were filled with rage. Brave warriors like Gall and Crazy Horse quickly gathered fighters and stormed toward Reno's soldiers. Reno was stunned by the sudden and fierce counterattack. His troops panicked. Rumors say Reno had been drinking that day, which clouded his mind and made it hard to think clearly. He and Bloody Knife tried to decide what to do, but the native warriors noticed Bloody Knife was close to Reno, making him a target. While Reno was speaking, a single shot rang out. It struck Bloody Knife in the head, killing him instantly. Blood and brain matter splattered across Reno's face. In that moment, terror gripped him. Shaking and confused, he ordered his men to run. The soldiers fled in a hurry, dropping their weapons and even their horses as they scrambled across the river. The native warriors calmly stood on the opposite bank, picking off the soldiers one by one as they ran. Not far away, Captain Benteen, positioned on a hill, heard the sound of battle. He rode to the top of the hill and saw Reno and a small group of survivors crawling up the slope. Reno, pale and desperate, begged for help, saying he had lost many of his men. Benteen looked at the broken group and asked the question everyone feared. "Where's Custer?" Reno had no answer. Benteen sighed. He remembered other times when Custer's hunger for glory had caused trouble. It seemed like those old mistakes were coming back again. Gunfire could still be heard in the distance where Custer had gone. Custer had sent a message to Benteen, asking him to come quickly. But Benteen stayed where he was with Reno. They remained on that hilltop for nearly 2 hours, listening as the sounds of battle slowly faded away. Finally, one of Benteen's captains couldn't take it anymore. He rode off to find out what had happened. What he discovered would stay with him forever. What did he see? How did Custer really end his life? Let's dive into it. Custer's last stand. After leading his men carefully through the hills, Custer stopped at the top of a ridge. That place would one day be called Calhoun Hill. From there, he looked out over the land, thinking about his next move. Custer believed he had a clever plan. He thought if he could capture the women and children in Sitting Bull's camp, the warriors would stop fighting to save their families. To Custer, it seemed simple. He would charge down the hill, cross the Little Bighorn River, and take as many women and children as he could. He believed this would force the warriors to give up. Confident, Custer rode at the front of his men, hoping to fill them with courage and trust. When Sitting Bull heard about Custer's attack from the north, even he felt afraid for a moment. He later said, "We felt defeated." But what happened next was not what Custer expected. The Cheyenne and Lakota warriors had been waiting for this. Hidden on the far side of the river, they were ready. When Custer's soldiers came forward, the warriors attacked with a sudden rain of arrows and bullets. At the same time, Crazy Horse and the other fighters, who had been chasing Reno's men, rushed back to join the battle against Custer. Custer had made a terrible mistake. He had no idea how many warriors there really were and how strong they would fight. His soldiers were quickly pushed back, forced to run up the hill. Lieutenant Calhoun and his men held their ground at the top of a hill that would later carry his name. Custer, along with his brothers and most of his men, fell back to a place now known as Last Stand Hill. The battle grew worse. Within minutes, Crazy Horse and his fighters circled around behind the hill, trapping Custer and his men. Calhoun's group fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. All of them were killed. Then Custer's brother-in-law and his men were surrounded and defeated. It became clear to Custer that Benteen's reinforcements weren't coming. He was alone, outnumbered, and surrounded by warriors who showed no signs of stopping. Everywhere Custer looked, the Native American fighters filled the land, moving closer and closer. One by one, the remaining soldiers fell. Arrows and bullets flew from every direction. The fighting was so wild that sometimes even the warriors accidentally hurt their own people in the confusion. It was a battle without mercy, and it seemed to have no end. Nobody knows for sure who was the last to fall. But later, Sitting Bull said his fighters told him they saw Custer standing alone, surrounded by the fallen bodies of his men, like broken corn stalks lying in a field. It was a sad and lonely ending for a man who had hoped to become a hero. While this was happening, Major Benteen and Major Reno were trapped on a nearby hill with about 400 soldiers. They fought through the night of June 25th, holding their ground against endless attacks. They were scared and tired, but they didn't give up. Finally, on the evening of June 26th, they saw help arriving. General Terry and General Gibbon were coming from the north. It was only then that Sitting Bull told his people to leave the battlefield. When General Terry arrived, the first thing he asked was the same question Benteen had asked before. "Where's Custer?" The sad news travels. The news that came after the battle was terrible. Custer and more than 200 of his soldiers were dead. Their bodies were scattered across the field, a quiet and sorrowful sign of the fierce fight that had happened there. Some of the fallen soldiers had been treated harshly after death. It showed just how deeply the Native American warriors loved their land and families, and how angry they were at those trying to take it from them. When Captain Benteen looked down at Custer's body, he noticed something strange. The wounds on Custer didn't seem to come from the .45 caliber bullets the U.S. cavalry used. It looked like they had been made by rifle shots from far away. Later, Lieutenant Edward S. Godfrey would share even more heartbreaking details. Custer's body had been badly hurt, and someone had pushed an arrow deep into him. It was a haunting and sad sight. As Benteen walked through the battlefield, a soldier called him over to see another fallen man. This one had 2 gunshot wounds, one in the chest and one in the head. When Benteen saw who it was, his face changed. Shocked, he quietly said, "Oh my goodness, it's him." Back at Fort Abraham Lincoln, the tragic news arrived on July 6, 1876. Word spread quickly, and what made it even sadder was the timing. Just 2 days earlier, on July 4th, Americans had celebrated the country's 100th birthday. The whole nation had been filled with pride and hope for the future. They cheered for their country's success and for heroes like Custer, who many believed was bravely helping tame the wild frontier.
George Armstrong Custer has been both deified and vilified, but whatever you think of him, he was a brave man.
So when people heard Custer was dead, they couldn't believe it. How could the powerful United States Army lose to Native American warriors? Many were in shock. It was hard for them to accept that Custer and 268 of his men had been killed in battle. People everywhere began pointing fingers. Some blamed Custer, saying he was too proud and too eager to be famous. They believed his risky choices led his men to their deaths. Others blamed Benteen and Major Reno, accusing them of ignoring Custer's orders and failing to come to his aid when it mattered most. What's sad is that Sitting Bull and his warriors didn't get the praise they deserved. They had fought with skill, bravery, and heart, even though they were outnumbered and outgunned. They had won a historic battle, but few gave them credit. The world didn't want to believe that Native American fighters could defeat a famous U.S. leader like Custer. After the battle, Custer and his brother Tom were buried in a shallow grave. Their bodies were wrapped in blankets and covered with rocks to keep the animals away. But when soldiers came back a year later, they found only scattered bones. The grave had been disturbed. Later, Custer's remains were moved. On October 10, 1877, he was buried again, this time at West Point Cemetery with full military honors. The place where the battle happened was turned into a national cemetery in 1886. It still stands today, a quiet reminder of the lives lost and the lessons learned from that tragic day. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.